welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. Today we will turn our attention to the French archipelago in the Indian Ocean, Mayotte, which is now on red alert due to the tropical storm. Only weeks after the destruction wrought by Hurricane Chido, one village has already been completely flooded, adding to the challenges faced by the 320,000 residents of this France's poorest department. Authorities are urging the population to seek shelter in sturdy buildings or to head to one of the 79 emergency accommodation centers set up in response to the storm. We'll explore the political, social and humanitarian implication of these repeated disasters on the France's overseas territories and how the government is responding to this mounting crisis. Joining me now from France is Zaur Sadiq-Beyli, political scientist and a lawyer. From Washington, we have Hamdi Rifai, a political analyst. And from Senegal, joining us is Yumi Sen, the General Secretary of the Russian Cultural Center in Dakar. Dear experts, warm welcome to our program.
Thank you for the invitation. Welcome.
Thank you very much for joining our discussion. So, Yumi, I will start with you. Despite France's promises to support the island's residents, accuse the government of systematic dissatisfaction and neglect. What's your attitude to the situation in Mayotte? Why do you think Paris is not able to respond properly?
Well, what we're witnessing currently in Mayotte, it's a catastrophe. And from any perspective, you should think that France would be helping firsthand the population that is in there. But what we notice, unfortunately, is that far from it, there is a lot of things that are lacking. In Africa, we're a bit used to it because help used to be a lot of promises and very little actions. So it's very upsetting to see that a territory that is considered as part of France being so neglected, especially at this age and time where they know how important it is to give first aid very quickly. So we are very sad to see what's happening there because unfortunately we would like to be able to help more, but regardless that they are just as African as us, we don't have any direct contact, whilst France does. And we really hope that they will put themselves together and start doing proper help and proper support and try to evacuate the kids and the families that are suffering there for weeks now.
Indeed, Yumi, the situation is worsening day by day, despite the fact that French government is trying to ensure that they are able to support the population there. But we should remember that Mayotte is an overseas region of France and a disputed territory, as the Comoros claim it as their own. How does this situation affect the Paris attitude towards the region?
Well, so far we saw a lot of talk and very little action. So I really do not see them moving and seeming keen to move, and I can't really say for the government if shown us any concrete action apart from the plane that came with Macron and left straight after without sorting anything. And honestly, being in Africa, I don't expect much more from them because I'm not used to seeing them reacting any quicker in any other country, which is really a pity. But at this stage in time, I don't see how we could contribute any better. I wish we could, and I wish we would be able to support more and rely less on the governments. But unfortunately, for the moment, we're all stuck, and we only have prayers and hope that the situation will be sorted out as soon as possible.
Yumi, thank you so much. I know that you have very limited time for joining our discussion. Therefore, I thank you for joining Inside Politics today.
Thank you.
And we will continue to talk about this issue with our experts from Washington and France. So, Zaur, let me address my first question to you. Share with us the latest developments in Mayotte and what's your opinion about the reaction of Paris to the situation there?
Well, I will say, in perspective, when you're looking at what situation happening, it's just a disaster. I am agree with my counterpart, but I will take something. Mayotte officially in French Republic from 1848. The date, remember, is glorious history of France. It was a second revolution and second republic was created. In that point, Mayotte was joining because it was a protectorate. It was a territory with no definition. But from 1848, it's a part of French Republic, and of course, that was a proceeding. My colleague talked about that. Why there is a contentions with a Comoros Island. But what's happening in 1976, which is in past century, the last date, there was a referendum, and from this date it became a department of Other department. But it was also in the end of the steady glorious time. But from this now we are in 2025, and just let me tell you that three figures, three dates that shocked my eyes, and that's for me as a French citizen also, it's a shocking. Do you know that for 310,000 inhabitants, which for a territory which is several islands but 376 kilometers, so not so big, there is 77% of population living under the minimum wage. I mean, poor people, really poor, which is in France it's 14%. 29% of Mahorians don't have potable drinking water at their homes, and 40% of all constructions, all homes in islands in Mayotte are not constructed from wood or from stone, but from straw. This is very shocking. In a 21st century, we have still a territory of French Republic, which is a rich country, but it's kind of abandoned. So I'm sharing the arguing and opinion of my colleagues, saying that the sentiment today, the feeling of the people living there, that the French Republic just abandons them. And of course, this is legitimized that movement and that people in opposition, of course, that saying that Mayotte should become independent, should get out of Republic, because if Republic can't deal with, so there should find another solution. Of course, up to today, I just have seen the last updates, the red notice. Now it's cancelled because as a hurricane will not strike again island. But the new law is an urgent law, is in preparation in a parliament by Manuel Valls, which is special commissar of government for overseas territories, so for Mayotte, which is a former prime minister. But the problem, I will say, it's a problem of just acting, doing new laws, news urgent some measures. The problem is general structural, because in France have now think about if in nearly 100 and more than 180 years we couldn't settle the problem, but we will do today with this island, which is as you told, Anastasia, it made part of French Republic because it's a department overseas department, and also region overseas department and region, which is official status of Mayotte from 2009.
Right, Hamdi, how do you understand the situation? Paris is trying to position itself as a government which is willing to support many countries globally, all around the world, and fighting, saying that Mayotte or New Caledonia or some other territories in the African continent is belonging to France, showing that they are willing to support the population there. But here in Mayotte, it's a real disaster. So how do you understand the situation and the ability of France to support the territories, which is geographically located far away?
It's important to understand the big picture here before anything. There's really three main actors in Africa, foreign powers, superpowers even, that operate within Africa. China, the United States, and Russia. And of course, then you have others which are not superpowers, France, Turkey, etc., but are more regional powers or try to exert their influence throughout. Now, the influence or the imperialism that we've seen from France has been very different from what we've seen other countries, how other countries have tried to influence Africa. Really, France's influence or control throughout Africa has been economic, it's been political, and it's been military. So we've seen them try to dominate the picture of everything that occurs wherever they either have a military base or have partnerships with local countries or try to exert their influence. And in most cases, they failed. And we've seen this trend developing over time where countries have actually asked France to leave, to take their militaries and go back to France, or to end their imperialism or their control of those areas or support of those areas. And it's in part because France has been a declining nation and their influence has been declining, and there's been a rising populism throughout Africa because they've seen there are other countries that offer better alternatives, better support for them to help them progress. So, for example, we've seen that China does an infrastructure kind of thing where it tries to help with building of infrastructure and puts those countries in debt to some extent, but it doesn't take political control or military control necessarily. The US has tried to exert its influence in ways of building democracy or rule of law or social programs and things of that nature, kind of a soft power. Whereas Russia, we've seen, in the Sudan, elsewhere, where it actually uses military might and control and even murder to try to exert its influence. So what we've seen is a decline of France's power, everywhere from the Ivory Coast to Chad and throughout the Sahel. So this is not a new situation where we see that they're failing and unable to meet, what's being asked of them. And when you have a tragedy such as what's occurring now, whether it be a weather tragedy or a military tragedy, you see that France is unable to meet the demands and satisfy the humanitarian aspect of what's being asked of it. France has had this problem for quite some time, and we can see that the reason that they have this problem is they don't come listening to the local population, and so that populism rises. And we see that they use kind of methods that are less than ethical of creating divisions within the country, sectarian divisions even, dividing Muslims from Christians and creating fault lines to maintain that control. So, the real political reality is that France is declining in Africa, and other countries like Turkey are rising because they listen to the local populations.
So that's very interesting. It's more about foreign policy of France, but we do know about political and economic crisis inside the Fifth Republic, appointed just before the situation in Mayotte. New French Prime Minister now is facing his first political test in handling the crisis. The emergency bill is expected to pass, although it will be presented to a deeply divided National Assembly, if I'm not mistaken, on January 20th. So what do you think? What are the main challenges may Prime Minister Bayrou face there?
Well, if we generally analyze the situation of France of today, we can quote a famous political quote that all you. It's when the ruling elite, the powers, they can't, and the downs, the people, they don't want. So that's the very situation today of the France, and in overseas territories, you are absolutely right. Inside of France, we have a problem with the National Assembly, with the power, with the government, which is unstable. We can file again, with the budget. They can vote because the assembly is divided in three parties and they don't agree with each other, neither for retired bill nor for another thing, for immigration, for all the principal things, and also for overseas territory. I will just give you an example, as many times I explained it, how it works in France. Look, one of the three powers that can come to power within the next several years, it's Marine Le Pen party, and it's far right, The far right have a different vision of all that things. They, for example, saying that France have to stop to take immigrants and stop to send money overseas and everywhere.
So I'm sorry, just to make it sure, Marine Le Pen secured 59.1% of the vote on the island during the second round of the last presidential election.
True. That's true, but Marine Le Pen also saying, for example, for Marine Le Pen, it's no problem to get all the territories, kick them out, let's say so, from Republic. Why? Because they're saying that all money going there, and that's true, okay? And that's why I said before, it's a structural problem. Because when these territories have been constructed many years ago, okay, as no one was thinking about economy, and the economy is constructed in this way that metropole have to bring all the products there. That costs very expensive. So the life in all overseas territory, it's much more expensive than in homeland territory. And it's insolvable problem. No? This problem will bring another. So if we're quoting far right, the French money is going abroad, overseas, and for migrants. So, and one of the problem of Mayotte also is immigration, because there's contentions with Comore Islands is that the Comorians trying to come to Mayotte to give the birth there and to get French citizenship to overpass the referendum in the future and make the territory independent to get back on Mayotte, because they never accepted the results of referendum neither in 1974 nor in 1976. So for today's solution is unsolvable. Of course, it's a test for new government. Of course, the emergency bill I think will pass. But I think we can't pass a bill today, but we can't settle a problem for a long term. For a long time, French have to think about what the French Republic wants to do with this territory. Do we need to keep the territory we can't administrate, or maybe we don't want to administrate or help? So that's a fundamental question have to be done. It's not, it kind of populism saying France is a big country. It's a power of France, having all that islands all over the world, having military bases, having New Caledonia, Mayotte, and another thing. Another thing, what we will do with the citizens living there, because I remind you that Mayotte is also extraterritorial of European Union. It's a department and region of French Republic, and it's 310,000 people living. Inhabitants of Mayotte are French nationals. Okay, they should not be discriminated, and they have an equal rights be in front of us, all of us. So today they have a right to have a decent habitation, good condition of life, potable water, drinking water, all that stuff that they don't have today, and that's a challenge for France, for government to sell it or to give it up.
That's very interesting. Hamdi, I guess you are also very well aware about the domestic policy, domestic problems the French government is facing. As Zaur mentioned, Marine Le Pen and President Emmanuel Macron have totally different views on the several domestic issues when it comes to migration and also to the foreign policy, as Macron is saying that France has to keep all of those territories, which is former colonies, for example, where the French presence still relevant, or for Marine Le Pen, this situation has totally different angle of understanding it. How do you think the domestic problems French government is facing inside also affect its foreign policy? And do you expect the situation will change when the president term of Macron's will end in a couple of years?
Well, just as we saw that there was a rise of the right in the United States with populism, we're also seeing that in France. In fact, in France, I think that's where we see the clearest example of this competition between traditional politics, foreign policy of France, and populism, where it's make France great again. They don't use the slogan like that, but that's what it really is. It's about making France great again. And their problems domestically are so great, in part because they have so many problems with colonies, with their military abroad, with their foreign policy here, and their foreign policy everywhere. They don't put France first. So, for example, you know personally that in Azerbaijan, we saw they played a very destructive role in the OSCE, Minsk group. It was a matter of division, and then even after they've continued to do that in supporting Armenia by sending weapons. And now we saw most recently that the French foreign minister went to Syria and didn't even want to remove sanctions on a regime that didn't exist when the sanctions were placed. So the French foreign policy doesn't make any sense, and it's a struggle domestically for them to rebuild, because domestically they say one thing and then in the foreign policy they're doing another. So in France, you see this discrimination against people that come to France that are Muslim. You see this discrimination in how people that hold French citizenship abroad are treated. This is a problem that has gotten out of hand for them. And so there's a recognition from the far right that they can't handle it. But there's this desperate need to kind of continue to try hold on to the old France. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing France in decline.
Hamdi, one additional question to you. You are living in the United States of America. In a few days, Donald Trump will be back to the White House, and we know about the close ties between France and the United States of America, not only within the NATO alliance, but overall when it comes to several global issues. Do you expect the United States to support French government, if needed, by financial means or by any other means, to make sure that France is still keeping its influence in some other parts of the world? How do you expect Donald Trump to have his behavior to the situation?
I certainly think that America's foreign policy is going to diverge from France's. And we already see that. The most clear and obvious example is that while Donald Trump says he's going to withdraw all troops from Syria, for example, France is saying they want to send new troops to Syria. So there's really this very divergent direction that the U.S. and France will be going in. And I think that we're going to see that in every geography, wherever the U.S. and France have either played a role together, or that France has sought the U.S. help, or the U.S. has sought France's help. So I think that, you know, whether we are looking at Azerbaijan, or we're looking at Syria, or we're looking at Africa, or the Middle East, we're going to see France become less and less important. And we know that particularly in the Middle East, we're going to see a lot of that, because Saudi Arabia has good, close relationships with Trump. All of the Middle East preferred Trump. Azerbaijan, I think you could easily argue, preferred Trump. I think most nations preferred Trump because they're really just exhausted from that old order, the global world order of liberal ideas that haven't worked and have failed in many respects. While most of these nations want to see democracy and civil society grow, they also want to exert their own influence domestically. And France in particular has been a wall to preventing that. You know, as I started out in this discussion, you know, I explained that France's influence is not just military or economic. It's economic, it's political, it's military. They seek to dominate the playing field, preventing the local economies and countries from having any kind of influence over their own futures. And so that's why we're going to see France's political future really take a very different turn from the U.S.'s, because the U.S. has become more transactional, more interested in seeking its own interess and assuring those interests abroad.
Indeed, we do know how Donald Trump prefers to keep in mind only his first priorities and his own interests when it comes to specific situation in a global mean. Indeed, France is currently going through a tough time in its economy, but in order to keep the influence in Mayotte or somewhere else, the French government needs to support the region by financial means, especially now after the disaster. The amount of money which is needed to recover, it's really significant. How does this affect Paris' ability to provide financial assistance to Mayotte?
Well, I don't know what is the intention of new French government. I mean, François Bayrou, you know, the main problem in France that we have 1,300 billions of debt that have to be paid. And I told already, I remember, if you remember with you in our interview, that from this year, the rate of interest should be paid annually for French debt is 60 billion, which is tremendous. For comparison, social programs in France taking about between 40 and 50 billions per year, all that money that Marine Le Pen wants to keep from foreigners, from social programs, etc., which is a big problem. So I will say, France, they have to take an example on Azerbaijan. if you permit me, I will make a parallel. Azerbaijan claimed for years that Karabakh it's a homeland territory and surrounded regions occupied by Armenia, also its homeland territory. And no one helped us to get them back. So Azerbaijan made it by force using Article 51 of Charter of United Nations, keep the territory back. Okay, but what's the next step? What did Azerbaijan? You know, Azerbaijan situation in the country, and we have some late because of this conflict, which made us 30 or maybe 20 years late. So the country developing slowly, having potential, but so we have the money and we need to develop another things. But from the very moment Azerbaijan get its total sovereignty owned in homeland territory, we began reconstruct. Azerbaijan began reconstruct Karabakh and surrounded territories, demining them for arrangement, constructing, reconstructing, and we know, and you know very well that that reflects and reacts on domestic policy, because this money could be spent for social programs, for another thing. So Azerbaijan is today continuing to suffering again in consequences of the conflict, because the choice of government would assume that if they're our territory, we doing the best to reconstruct and to show that this is our land, homeland, and we will continue to do it. And French have to change this attitude. Of course, that will be difficult. Of course, the Mayotte will need a Marshall Plan, money, and
that's very
big
interesting.
investment.
You are touching a very important moment, as French Prime Minister, if I'm not mistaken, promised a different future for Mayotte. What future Paris can offer to the region? What kind of future?
Well, I will say first future you have to offer to the people to make the statistics and data acceptable. For example, I tell you the three data I gave it to you, it's unacceptable today. We can't have in France 40% of, let's say, poor people living in a need, and have 77% in Mayotte, in another part of French territory. That is discrimination. That should stop. And there's, I don't give you another figure, but also it's not a problem with it. It's problem with everything in Mayotte and general in overseas territory. It's problem with the scholarization for children going to school, for alphabetization. A problem with enterprises, with intellectuals, but all doctors, hospitals, everything. You can take statistic on one column. You paid data from French homeland territory, metropole, and for another you made any French overseas territory. Will always have the same problem, the delta with the figures. Only thing which is different is that the cost of life is much more higher on the overseas than in metropole, and that's we know why.
Right. So, dear expert, thank you very much for joining our discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching Inside Politics. Today we discussed the disaster situation which is happening now in Mayotte, and the responsibility of French government to take care over the population which is being considered as a French citizens. Do stay with us and see you in the next edition of Inside Politics.